My name is Peyton. I am 33 years old, and today a judge ordered me to remove my Navy Cross in a crowded courtroom. My sister-in-law smirked, thinking she had finally stolen my home and destroyed my life. I said nothing and calmly unpinned my medal. What she did not know was that my next move would end the judge's career and send her straight to federal prison. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you. The absolute chaos of my life started precisely at Thanksgiving dinner. I had spent the entire morning preparing a massive feast in the kitchen of my historic Atlanta estate. The property, valued at $1.5 million, was left exclusively to me by my late grandfather. It featured original hardwood floors, high ceilings, and a sprawling backyard that felt like a sanctuary. My grandfather left it to me because we shared a special bond. He was a military veteran himself, and he respected the fact that I had forged my own path. My family, on the other hand, despise my choices. They are prominent African-American socialites in the Atlanta scene, obsessed with appearances, country club memberships, and wealth. My parents, Winston and Patricia, always viewed me as a massive disappointment. I was a tomboy who chose to serve my country as a Navy corpsman, surviving combat zones and saving lives, eventually earning the Navy Cross. After my service, I became an elite freelance cybersecurity specialist. I made excellent money working from home, but because I did not wear designer brands or attend their high society galas, I was practically an outcast in my own family. The true golden child was my older brother Malik. Malik was a luxury real estate developer on paper, but in reality, his last 3 major projects had completely tanked. He only maintained his lavish lifestyle by riding the coattails of his wife Keisha. Keisha was a ruthless lifestyle influencer with millions of followers. She cared only about money status and her internet brand. I had invited them all over for Thanksgiving, hoping to bridge the gap that had been growing between us. I had just finished setting the antique lace tablecloth and was carving the roasted turkey when the front door swung open. Keisha marched into my dining room, wearing a tight silk designer dress, holding her phone up to record herself for her followers. Malik trailed behind her, looking unusually tense. My parents followed immediately, criticizing the fact that I was wearing a simple sweater instead of formal evening wear. I ignored their comments and asked everyone to take a seat. Before I could even serve the first plate, Keisha slammed a thick, heavy legal folder right onto the center of the table. The heavy thud rattled the crystal glasses, and the folder landed partially on the serving platter, splashing dark gravy across the white lace. I looked up, stunned. Keisha was staring down at me with a sickening smirk. "Sign it," Peyton, Keisha demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. "My brand is expanding rapidly, and my followers need to see me living in a premium, historic space. You are just a single woman sitting behind computer monitors all day. You do not need a $1.5 million house all to yourself. We are taking the title to the estate today." I stared at the legal document, the bold letters clearly outlining a transfer of deed. I looked over at my brother, fully expecting him to intervene and tell his wife to stop this ridiculous prank. Instead, Malik refused to meet my eyes. He looked down at his empty plate, completely enabling her behavior. It was my mother, Patricia, who spoke up next. Her tone was sharp and completely lacking any maternal warmth. "Do not look at your brother like that," Patricia scolded, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You owe this to our family. You selfishly enlisted in the military straight out of high school instead of joining the family business like you were supposed to. We had to drain our retirement savings to bail out Malik from his failed business debts, because you were not here to pull your weight and support him. It is time you pay us back. Sign the house over to Keisha right now, or we will take it by force." My father, Winston, nodded in agreement. "Your mother is right, Peyton. Keisha brings value and visibility to the Montgomery name. You just bring up uncomfortable questions at the country club. Do the right thing for once in your life." I sat there, absorbing the sheer audacity of their words. They wanted to steal my inheritance, the only place I felt safe, just so Keisha could use my historic staircase as a background for her sponsored posts. They blamed me for Malik blowing through hundreds of thousands of dollars just because I chose to serve my country instead of cleaning up his messes. I took a deep, steadying breath. My military training had taught me how to remain perfectly calm under extreme pressure. I picked up the gravy-soaked legal folder. Keisha smiled even wider, pulling a gold pen from her designer purse and holding it out to me as if I were a fan asking for an autograph. I took the gold pen from her hand. I set it gently on the table. Then I gripped the thick stack of legal documents with both hands and calmly ripped them straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper echoed loudly in the silent dining room. I ripped the pages again, tearing through the thick cardstock, and tossed the gravy-covered pieces right into Keisha's lap. Keisha gasped dramatically, jumping back as the grease stained her expensive silk dress. "What is wrong with you?" she shrieked, batting the papers away. I stood up from the head of the table. My voice was icy and carried absolute authority. "Dinner is over," I announced. "Everyone out of my house right now." Winston slammed his fist on the table. "You cannot speak to us this way. We are your parents." I looked at him without blinking. Parents do not ambush their daughter on a holiday to steal her inheritance. I will not say it again. "Get out of my house." They scrambled to gather their coats, muttering insults, and completely shocked that their intimidation tactics had failed. Keisha was near tears over her ruined dress, already playing the victim. As they reached the front door, Malik finally found his courage. He turned around, a nasty, desperate sneer twisting his face. "You should not have done that." Peyton Malik threatened, pointing at me. "You think you are so untouchable in this big, historic house." But the judge assigned to our property lawsuit is Thomas Kensington. He is a regular at our country club, and Keisha's management company does a lot of very lucrative favors for him. You have already lost. He slammed my front door shut. I stood alone in the quiet hallway, the reality of his threat sinking in. This was not just a family dispute anymore, it was a declared war. The morning sun had barely crested the Atlanta skyline when my phone began vibrating so violently it nearly rattled right off my nightstand. I reached over, my eyes heavy from a restless night of processing my family's ultimate betrayal. The screen was a blinding wall of notifications. Hundreds of missed calls, thousands of direct messages, and an endless stream of social media mentions. My stomach tightened. In my line of work as a cybersecurity specialist, a sudden influx of communication usually meant a massive data breach. But this was infinitely worse. This was a targeted character assassination, and the sniper was my own sister-in-law. I opened a social media app, and Keisha's face immediately filled my screen. She was sitting on the plush white sofa of the downtown penthouse I knew my brother could not afford. She wore no makeup, her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she was crying hysterically. It was a masterclass in manipulation. The video already had over 3 million views. "I just wanted to bring my family together for Thanksgiving." Keisha sobbed into the camera, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. I went to my sister-in-law's house to offer an olive branch, but she snapped. "You guys know she is a military veteran. She suffers from severe violent PTSD episodes, and she refuses to get help." She cornered me in the dining room. She screamed at me, and then she physically lunged at my pregnant belly. Keisha wrapped her arms protectively around her stomach, looking absolutely terrified. "I thought I was going to lose my baby," she cried, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "I am terrified for my life. We need to raise awareness about unstable veterans refusing mental health treatment. Please pray for my unborn child." I stared at the screen in absolute disgust. Keisha was not pregnant. She had never been pregnant. But to her 3 million followers, she was a vulnerable, traumatized mother-to-be who had just been brutally attacked by a deranged soldier. I scrolled down to the comments section, and the vitriol was suffocating. People were demanding I be locked up in a psychiatric ward. Strangers were calling my military service a red flag. They were tagging the local police department, demanding I be arrested for assault. She had weaponized my honorable service to paint me as a ticking time bomb. A loud, rhythmic chanting suddenly echoed from outside my bedroom window. I walked over, pulled back the heavy velvet curtains, and looked down at my front gate. My driveway was completely swarmed. News vans were parked illegally on the grass, their satellite dishes raised. Paparazzi were shoving their camera lenses through the wrought iron bars of my grandfather's estate. Dozens of furious protesters, clearly mobilized by Keisha's rabid fanbase, were holding up cardboard signs. One sign read, "Lock up the psycho vet." Another demanded justice for Keisha's baby. They were screaming, throwing empty coffee cups over my fence and completely blocking the street. Before I could even step away from the window, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the chief security officer of a massive federal defense contractor, my primary and most lucrative client. I answered immediately, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Peyton, we have a catastrophic problem," the executive said, skipping any pleasantries. "Our public relations department just flagged a viral video accusing you of violent instability and threatening a pregnant woman." "It is a completely fabricated smear campaign," I replied calmly. "I can provide security footage from my home proving no such altercation took place." The executive cut me off. "It does not matter if it is fake, Peyton. We are a federal contractor. We deal with highly classified government data. We cannot have our lead cybersecurity architect plastered across national television as a volatile threat. Our board of directors just held an emergency vote. We are terminating your contract effective immediately." I did not even have time to process the loss of my biggest income source before a second email notification popped up on my screen. It was from a multinational banking corporation, my second largest client. The subject line read, "Immediate suspension of services." In less than 20 minutes, Keisha's fake tears had cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars in legitimate contracts. She was attempting to starve me out financially, so I would have no choice but to surrender my home. My phone chimed again, a voice message from my mother, Patricia. I hit play, expecting at least a shred of maternal concern regarding the angry mob outside my window. "We warned you, Peyton." My mother's voice hissed through the speaker, dripping with condescension. "You brought this entirely on yourself. You disrespected your brother, and you humiliated Keisha. She is a brand, and her brand is under attack because you refuse to cooperate. Sign the house over to them today, and Keisha will post an update saying you agreed to check into a mental health facility. It is the only way to save your reputation. Do not call me again until you are ready to surrender the deed." She hung up. My own mother was actively participating in a scheme to commit me to a psychiatric ward just to steal my grandfather's property. Any normal person would have collapsed under the pressure. They would have cried panicked or surrendered. But my family made one massive miscalculation. They forgot that the military trained me to operate in hostile environments, and my career taught me how to dismantle hostile networks. I closed the velvet curtains, shutting out the noise of the flashing cameras and screaming protesters. I walked down the hall and unlocked the reinforced door to my home office. It was a secure command center equipped with multiple high-end servers, dual monitors, and an encrypted network isolated from the main house. I sat down in my leather chair and woke up my systems. I needed to secure my financial backups, but as my secondary monitor flickered to life, an automated security alarm flashed a bright, solid red across the screen. It was a silent warning from my primary firewall. Someone was actively trying to breach my network. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the origin of the incoming attack. It was a sophisticated brute force penetration attempt designed to smash through security protocols while the system owner was distracted. I ran a reverse trace on the IP address. The geographic locator pinged back immediately. It mapped directly to a luxury high-rise building downtown, Malik and Keisha's penthouse. A cold realization washed over me. The tearful video, the angry mob outside my gate, the flooded phone lines, it was all a tactical diversion. Keisha did not just want to cancel me on the internet. She was using the PR nightmare as a smokescreen. While I was supposed to be weeping in my bedroom, terrified of the paparazzi, and mourning my lost contracts, her management team was deploying hackers to break into my encrypted servers. They were not looking for photos or emails. They were hunting for the original digitally notarized trust deed signed by my grandfather. It was the only legal document standing between them and the complete theft of my estate. The war had officially moved to my territory, and they were about to learn exactly why I was the best in the business. I deployed a localized network blackout protocol with a few keystrokes completely severing my primary servers from the outside world. The aggressive digital assault from Keisha's penthouse slammed into a reinforced, impenetrable digital wall. I watched the traffic monitor flatline as her hired hackers lost their connection. My grandfather's trust deed remained safely encrypted behind layers of military-grade security. They had failed, but my momentary satisfaction was interrupted by a sharp vibrating alert from my phone. It was not a digital breach this time. It was a physical one. My perimeter security application flashed a bright orange warning. Motion detected in Sector 4. That was the rear garden, a heavily wooded area of the estate that bordered a quiet alleyway. Someone had scaled the wrought iron fence. I did not panic. I simply shifted from digital defense to physical protocol. I slipped out of my desk chair, moving silently through the dark, expansive halls of the historic house. I bypassed the main switches, relying on the moonlight streaming through the antique windows. I unlocked the heavy oak back door and stepped out into the humid Atlanta night air, keeping my back flush against the brick exterior. I heard the crunch of expensive leather shoes stepping on dry leaves. A shadow was moving clumsily through the azalea bushes, breathing heavily and swearing under his breath. I recognized the silhouette immediately. It was not a hired thug or a paparazzo. It was my brother. Malik stumbled out of the bushes and onto the stone patio, brushing dirt off the lapels of his custom-tailored suit. He looked absolutely pathetic. His usual arrogance, the polished facade of the successful luxury real estate developer, had completely evaporated. He was sweating profusely, his tie loosened, and his eyes darting frantically around the dark yard. "What are you doing creeping around my property in the middle of the night?" I asked, stepping out of the shadows. Malik jumped, nearly tripping backward over a stone planter. "Peyton," he gasped, clutching his chest. "Do you have to sneak up on people like that? Turn the security lights off. We need to talk. You have exactly 60 seconds to give me a reason not to trigger the silent alarm and have the police drag you out of here for trespassing," I replied, crossing my arms. Malik closed the distance between us, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. The aggressive bravado he had displayed at the Thanksgiving table was entirely gone. In its place was a desperate, groveling man. "Please," Izzy, Malik pleaded, using the childhood nickname I despised. "You have to listen to me. Things are bad. Really bad. My business is completely underwater. I have not sold a property in 8 months. The banks are calling in my loans. Keisha pays for everything. The penthouse, the cars, the lifestyle. She pays for it all." I stared at him, feeling nothing but cold indifference. "And what does your financial mismanagement have to do with my house?" "She is going to leave me, Peyton." He choked out, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "She told me tonight, if I do not get the title to this estate so she can use it as the flagship property for her lifestyle brand, she is filing for divorce. She will take whatever dignity I have left and humiliate me in front of the entire city. She holds all the cards. You have to sign the house over. Just do it for me. We are blood. I am your big brother. I need you to save me." I looked at this man, a 35-year-old adult, begging his younger sister to surrender her only home to appease his toxic wife. The sheer entitlement was staggering. "Save you?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want to talk about being blood? You want to talk about family obligations? Let us talk about what happened when I was 18 years old." Malik shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Peyton, do not bring up the past. We are talking about right now." "No, we are talking about patterns," I interrupted, stepping closer to him. "When I was 18, I worked double shifts at a diner to save up my college tuition. I had $20,000 sitting in a savings account. And you, the golden boy, decided you needed a down payment for a Porsche to impress your fraternity brothers. You stole my checkbook. You forged my signature. You drained every single cent I had worked for." I watched Malik swallow hard as the memory cornered him. "When the bank called to confirm the suspicious withdrawals, I told Mom and Dad what you did." I continued, the old anger fueling my words. "I expected them to hold you accountable. I expected them to call the police. Instead, Mom yelled at me. She blamed me for leaving my bag on the kitchen counter. Dad said you just made a youthful mistake and that pressing charges would ruin your bright future. They protected you and they let me lose my spot at the university. Because of you, I had no choice but to enlist in the military to get an education." "That was a long time ago," Malik stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I was just a kid. I did not know any better. And you did fine in the Navy. You got your medals. You are rich now. I survived despite you, not because of you," I fired back. "You have spent your entire life expecting me and our parents to clean up your messes. You hide behind Mom and Dad, and now you are hiding behind Keisha. I am not signing over my grandfather's house to fund your pathetic, hollow life. The answer is no. Now get off my property." I pointed toward the side gate, waiting for him to turn around and leave in shame. But the rejection did something to him. The desperation vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, malicious rage. The mask completely fell away. Malik took a step toward me, his hands balling into fists. His face twisted into a vicious sneer that looked exactly like our mother's. "You think you are so smart?" he hissed, the venom practically dripping from his words. "You think playing soldier made you untouchable. You do not understand what you are dealing with. Keisha is not just some internet celebrity selling makeup brushes. Her management company is tied to people who do not play by the rules. Powerful people. People who make problems disappear permanently." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly pitch. "This is not a family dispute anymore, Peyton. Sign the house over or you won't survive the week." The heavy pounding on my solid oak front door shattered the early morning silence vibrating through the floorboards of my grandfather's historic estate. I had barely slept after Malik threatened my life in the backyard. I was already at my kitchen island drinking black coffee and running secondary encryption protocols when the aggressive knocking began. I pulled up the exterior security feed on my tablet. 2 Atlanta Police Department officers were standing on my porch. Their postures were rigid, hands resting dangerously close to their duty belts. They were not here to ask polite questions. I unlocked the front door and pulled it open. Before I could even ask for their badge numbers, the taller officer shoved his way past me, forcing me to step back into the foyer to avoid a physical collision. His partner followed immediately, shutting my own front door behind him. "We are executing a search and seizure warrant for all electronic devices, hard drives, and communication equipment on these premises," the taller officer barked. His name tag read Officer Hayes. "This is an active investigation into felony cyber harassment and terroristic threats against Keisha Montgomery." I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated by 2 men trying to throw their weight around in my home. "Show me the warrant," I demanded, holding out my hand. Hayes snatched a folded paper from his tactical vest and shoved it against my chest. I unfolded it quickly, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. It was completely fabricated. There was no specific IP data, no documented probable cause, and no digital forensics attached. It was a blank check to strip my house of its electronics. But the signature at the very bottom of the page told me everything I needed to know. Judge Thomas Kensington. Malik had not been bluffing. My brother and his influencer wife had actually weaponized a corrupt county judge to send armed police officers to my house to steal my grandfather's digital trust deed. "Where is the office?" the second officer demanded, already shining a heavy flashlight down the hallway. "You do not have jurisdiction to seize my equipment," I stated clearly, matching his aggressive tone. "That warrant lacks basic constitutional requirements for digital seizure. If you unplug my servers, you are violating federal privacy laws." Hayes sneered, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You can argue with the judge later. Right now, you are going to step aside or I am going to charge you with obstructing a police investigation." They marched straight down the corridor, heading directly for the reinforced steel door of my home office. Malik must have given them the exact floor plan of the estate. The second officer pulled a heavy tactical crowbar from his belt, preparing to force the lock. "Do not damage my property," I said coldly, stepping ahead of them and punching my 12-digit passcode into the wall keypad. The heavy door clicked open. The 2 officers pushed past me again, their eyes widening as they took in my command center. It was not a standard home office. It was a climate-controlled server room with dual racks, commercial-grade cooling units, and 4 high-definition monitors spanning the main desk. They immediately reached for the primary power cables connected to the server racks. "Touch those cables and you will both be standing in front of a federal tribunal by Friday," I warned, my voice cutting through the hum of the cooling fans. Hayes paused, glaring at me over his shoulder. "Do not threaten us. We have a court order." I walked calmly to my primary terminal. I typed a rapid 10-key command and hit the enter button. Instantly, all 4 monitors flashed from my standard desktop interface to a stark, solid black screen displaying a bright red Department of Defense seal. "I do not make threats. I make guarantees," I explained, crossing my arms. "You are staring at a federal encryption lock. Those servers hold classified defense contracts for the United States government. If you attempt to tamper with, disconnect, or physically move those racks without top-secret federal clearance, the system will automatically initiate a localized wipe protocol. Every byte of data will be destroyed." Causing the destruction of federal defense data is a felony under the Espionage Act. Are you two willing to lose your badges, your pensions, and your freedom just to do a favor for a corrupt county judge and an Instagram influencer? The two officers froze. They exchanged a very nervous, calculating look. They had been sent here to bully a civilian into handing over a laptop. They were completely unprepared for a military-grade federal firewall. Hayes grabbed his radio, turning away from me to mutter a frantic, hushed conversation with a superior officer. I could not hear the response, but I watched the color drain from Hayes's face. He clipped the radio back onto his belt and turned toward me, his jaw clenched in absolute fury. They could not take the servers, and they knew it. Fine Hayes spat his face red with humiliation. We cannot seize the hardware, but we can take you. Before I could process his pivot, Hayes lunged forward and grabbed my right arm, twisting it violently behind my back. You are under arrest for resisting a lawful order, obstruction of justice, and cyber harassment, he shouted, slamming me against the doorframe of my own office. The physical pain was sharp, but I did not flinch. I had survived rigorous interrogation and survival training at Camp Lejeune. Two corrupt county cops trying to rough me up felt like child's play. I went entirely limp, offering zero physical resistance, giving them absolutely no excuse to draw their weapons or escalate the violence. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit deeply into my wrists as they locked them tight. They dragged me roughly down the hallway and out the front doors of my estate into the blinding morning sunlight. As they marched me down the front steps, I saw exactly why they had pivoted to a physical arrest. Standing across the street right on the public sidewalk was Keisha. She had a professional ring light set up on a tripod angled perfectly to capture the front gates of my house. She was holding her phone out live, streaming the entire ordeal to her millions of followers. She wore oversized designer sunglasses and wiped fake tears from her cheeks as the officers shoved me toward the back of their cruiser. "Look at her, guys!" Keisha cried into her phone, her voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "The unstable veteran is finally getting locked up. The police had to come save me. I told you all I was not safe. I am shaking right now. Please keep my baby in your prayers." The officers pressed their hands down on my head, forcing me into the cramped hard plastic back seat of the police car. The heavy door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I sat up straight, ignoring the throbbing pain in my wrists. I looked through the wire mesh of the cruiser window, locking eyes with Keisha across the street. She dropped the crying act for a split second, flashing me a wicked, victorious smirk before turning back to her camera to perform her victim routine. She thought she had won. She thought putting me in handcuffs and parading me in front of the internet would break me. She had no idea that throwing me in a holding cell was the exact mistake I needed her to make. The ride to the Fulton County Jail was a blur of flashing city lights and the abrasive crackle of the police radio. Officer Hayes made a point to hit every pothole on the route, hoping to shake my resolve. It did not work. I sat in the cramped back seat of the cruiser, with my hands cuffed tightly behind my back, my posture perfectly straight. They processed me like a common criminal. I went through the humiliating routine of fingerprinting mugshots and the confiscation of my personal belongings. They took my shoelaces, my belt, and my phone. I was escorted down a long, dreary corridor that smelled distinctly of industrial bleach and stale sweat before being shoved into a holding cell. The heavy iron door slammed shut with a deafening clang that echoed through the concrete block. I surveyed my new environment. There were 3 other women in the cell. One was pacing frantically, another was asleep on the cold floor, and the third was staring blankly at the chipped cinder block wall. I chose a spot on the hard metal bench and sat down, crossing my ankles. In the military, they teach you how to compartmentalize physical discomfort and extreme emotional distress. You put those feelings into a mental box and lock it tight until the mission is accomplished. My mission now was survival and systematic retaliation. Hours crawled by. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly, designed to disorient and exhaust the inmates. Finally, a guard approached the bars and rattled his keys against the metal. He called my name and told me I was permitted to use the communal wall phone at the end of the cell block to arrange for my bail. The judge had maliciously set the bond at a staggering $50,000, a clear tactic to keep me locked up through the weekend, while Keisha and Malik tried to seize my house. I picked up the heavy plastic receiver. Against my better judgment, I dialed my parents' home number. I knew they were toxic, but a small irrational part of me believed that knowing their daughter was sitting in a county jail cell would awaken some dormant parental instinct. The line rang twice before my mother, Patricia, answered. I identified myself and quickly explained that I had been falsely arrested on a fabricated warrant. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Patricia spoke. Her voice was completely devoid of warmth, sounding more like a corporate spokesperson than a mother. We saw Keisha's live stream. Peyton, she said coldly. We spoke to your brother. You brought this entirely on yourself. You embarrassed us in front of our friends and you threatened a pregnant woman. We will not be posting your bail. This is tough love until you learn to respect your sister-in-law and hand over that property. You can sit in that cell and think about the damage you have done to this family's reputation. The line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back onto the wall hook. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a pang of sorrow. Instead, a profound sense of absolute clarity washed over me. Any lingering loyalty I had to my family name was officially dead. They had chosen their side. They had aligned themselves with a fraud, a thief, and a corrupt judge. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of destruction. I was going to show them how to play it to win. The guard tapped his baton against the wall, telling me my time was up. I looked at him and calmly stated that I had a constitutional right to contact legal counsel, and my first call had not been to an attorney. He rolled his eyes but stepped back, allowing me to pick up the receiver one more time. I did not call a defense lawyer. A local attorney would spend weeks filing motions bogged down by the bureaucratic red tape that Judge Thomas Kensington directly controlled. I needed an immediate, overwhelming tactical strike. I dialed a Washington, D.C. area code, punching in a direct, unlisted number I had memorized during my deployment overseas. The line clicked open on the first ring. A deep, authoritative voice answered with his federal badge number. It was Special Agent David Carter. Carter and I had served together in the Marine Corps. We had pulled each other out of burning wreckage and trusted each other with our lives. He was now an elite operative in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically heading up a task force in the Financial Crimes Division. Carter, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. It is Peyton. I have a situation. Peyton Carter responded, his tone instantly shifting from bureaucratic to brotherly. Where are you? I gave him the address of the county jail. I delivered a rapid, precise briefing of the last 24 hours. I detailed the fake Thanksgiving lawsuit, the viral smear campaign, the fabricated search warrant signed by Judge Kensington, and the brute force hacking attempt originating from Keisha's penthouse. I told him they were trying to steal a historic estate and were using local law enforcement as their personal mercenaries. I need you to run a deep background diagnostic on my sister-in-law, I instructed. Her name is Keisha Montgomery. She operates an entity called Keisha Lifestyle, LLC. I need to know exactly where her money comes from and who she is paying off. I can hear the rapid clacking of Carter's mechanical keyboard over the line. He did not ask questions. He did not doubt my story for a fraction of a second. He simply went to work. Hold the line, he muttered, the sound of mouse clicks echoing in my ear. I am bypassing the standard civilian databases and going straight into the Federal Financial Surveillance Network. Let us see what your sister-in-law is hiding behind those social media filters. I stood in the drafty cell block hallway watching the second hand on the wall clock tick by. Every passing minute was another minute Malik had to try and locate the physical deed to my house. But I knew my digital defenses were holding. 2 minutes later, the typing stopped. The silence on the phone was absolute. When Carter finally spoke again, all the casual warmth had vanished from his voice. He sounded like a federal agent staring down the barrel of a massive organized crime syndicate. Peyton Carter said, his words slow and deliberate. I just pulled the tax filings, the offshore routing numbers, and the encrypted banking ledgers for Keisha Lifestyle, LLC. You need to listen to me very carefully. Your sister-in-law is not an influencer. The brand sponsorships are completely fake. The makeup lines, the clothing deals, they are all phantom corporations. She is a high-level money mule laundering millions of dollars for an illicit offshore gambling ring. I gripped the plastic phone receiver tighter, my mind racing. A money mule. That explained the sudden wealth, the penthouse, the absolute desperation to secure a clean, historic real estate asset to wash dirty cash. But Carter was not finished. He took a sharp breath. The laundering is bad, Peyton. But that is not what is going to bring the federal government to Atlanta. I am looking at her digitized payroll ledgers right now, and you are not going to believe the name of the county judge who receives a $50,000 direct deposit from her shell company on the first of every single month. I hung up the heavy plastic receiver and turned back to the guard. He was leaning against the concrete wall, looking incredibly bored, twirling a set of keys around his index finger. I walked right up to the iron bars. I told him I was ready to post my bail in full. He laughed, telling me I needed to call a bail bondsman if I did not have $50,000 in cash sitting in my pocket. I did not smile. I informed him that the Fulton County court system had an online portal for digital bond payments. I demanded access to the supervised public terminal in the booking area. Reluctantly, he escorted me down the bleak corridor to a computer station reserved for inmates processing their release forms. He logged me in expecting me to fail. He had no idea he was giving a top-tier cybersecurity architect direct access to an internet connection. I opened a secure encrypted browser instance. I bypassed my frozen domestic bank accounts entirely. I accessed a decentralized offshore cryptocurrency wallet I maintained for international security bounties. With a few rapid keystrokes, I converted exactly $50,000 into untraceable digital currency and wired it directly to the county court holding account. The transaction cleared in less than 10 seconds. The guard stared at the confirmation receipt flashing on the screen, completely speechless. I demanded my personal belongings and my release papers. By early afternoon, I was walking out of the heavy glass doors of the county jail. The bright Atlanta sunlight felt harsh, but the air tasted like freedom. I did not call a cab to take me back to my grandfather's estate. The property was likely still swarming with hostile paparazzi, and I could not risk running into another pair of corrupt police officers sent by Judge Kensington. I needed a secure environment where I could operate without interruption. I hailed a rideshare and gave the driver the address to an unassuming industrial park on the outskirts of the city. From the outside, the metal building looked like a neglected storage facility. Inside, it was a state-of-the-art climate-controlled backup command center. I had built it specifically for handling highly classified defense contracts that required absolute physical security. The steel-reinforced door required a biometric retinal scan to open. I walked into the dark room, the hum of heavy-duty cooling fans greeting me like an old friend. I powered up the primary workstation. 3 curved, high-definition monitors flickered to life, illuminating the dark room in a cold blue glow. It was time to hunt. I cracked my knuckles and launched a custom penetration testing suite I had written myself. Carter had given me the thread, and now it was my job to unravel the entire sweater. I started with Keisha's public persona. I pulled up her social media profiles, isolating the server traffic, connecting to her verified accounts. On the surface, she looked like a wildly successful lifestyle influencer. She posted daily photos of designer handbags, luxury cars, and tropical vacations. But as I peeled back the digital layers, the facade immediately crumbled. I analyzed her follower engagement metrics. Over 80% of her 3 million followers were automated bots generated by server farms in Eastern Europe. Her brand was entirely artificial. I shifted my focus from her social media to her corporate footprint. I targeted Keisha Lifestyle LLC, the primary business entity registered to her downtown penthouse. Using a series of proxy servers to mask my location, I slipped past the weak commercial firewalls of her accounting software. The financial data flooded my screens. I watched the numbers populate and my blood ran cold. Carter was absolutely right. Keisha was not making money by selling makeup tutorials or sponsored clothing. Her business accounts were receiving massive irregular cash injections from dozens of anonymous shell companies. I ran a tracking algorithm on the routing numbers. The algorithm highlighted a sophisticated web of wire transfers originating from illegal, unregulated sports betting rings and underground casinos operating out of state. The dirty money was being funneled directly into Keisha's corporate accounts. She would then generate fake invoices for non-existent marketing campaigns, effectively washing the illegal cash and making it look like legitimate corporate revenue. I leaned closer to the monitors, my eyes scanning the heavily encrypted outgoing ledgers. Keisha was moving millions of dollars a year. But a money mule of her caliber did not just hoard the cash. She had to distribute it to the people protecting the operation. I instructed my software to filter the outgoing wire transfers, looking for consistent high-value anomalies. The system flagged a recurring transaction immediately. On the first day of every single month, a wire transfer for exactly $50,000 was routed out of Keisha's main corporate account. The money was not being sent to another shell company. It was being wired to a private, highly secure wealth management firm in the Cayman Islands. Offshore accounts were notoriously difficult to crack, designed specifically to hide the identities of wealthy tax evaders and corrupt officials. But I was not a standard hacker. I was a military-trained cyber warfare specialist. I launched a targeted brute force decryption protocol against the Cayman Bank's routing portal. I did not need to break into their entire system. I just needed to pry open the specific data packet attached to Keisha's monthly deposit. The progress bar inched across my screen, fighting against the heavy international encryption. Code cascaded down my terminal in a blur of green text. After 4 agonizing minutes, the security wall cracked. The transaction details spilled onto my primary monitor. I opened the beneficiary file attached to the offshore trust fund. The digital document rendered slowly, line by line. I read the verified name on the account, and a cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. The trust fund was registered to Thomas Kensington, the exact same county judge who was actively presiding over the property lawsuit against me. The same man who had maliciously signed a fabricated warrant to have my home raided by armed police. The same man who had set my bail at $50,000 to keep me locked in a concrete cell. The puzzle pieces locked together with absolute terrifying clarity. Keisha and Malik were not just greedy family members trying to steal my grandfather's historic estate for internet clout. They needed my property because it was a $1.5 million asset with a clean, flawless financial history. They desperately needed to seize my estate to use it as a massive legitimate front to wash their illegal gambling money. And Judge Kensington was entirely on their payroll, weaponizing the local justice system to hand them my deed on a silver platter. They thought they had cornered a helpless, estranged sister. They had no idea they had just handed a federal cyber warfare specialist the exact digital evidence needed to destroy all of them. I reached over, tapping the save key, and began downloading every single piece of their corrupt financial empire to an encrypted flash drive. I secured the encrypted flash drive containing the offshore banking ledgers and tucked it safely into my jacket pocket. My digital counterattack had yielded the ultimate leverage, but the physical war was far from over. Less than an hour after I disconnected from my secure servers, I received a courier delivery at my warehouse command center. It was a formal subpoena for a mandatory pre-trial deposition regarding the property dispute. They wanted to force me into a room, corner me, and break me down. I welcomed the opportunity. The deposition was held at a high-end corporate law firm in the center of downtown Atlanta. I walked into the expansive glass-walled boardroom exactly on time. I did not bring a defense attorney. I was operating on a completely different battlefield now, and traditional civil counsel would only slow me down. Waiting for me around a massive mahogany table was Nia's lead attorney, a slick, overpaid attack dog named Mr. Caldwell. Sitting directly next to him were my parents, William and Brenda. They looked entirely out of place in a hostile legal deposition against their own daughter, yet there they sat, completely aligned with the people trying to destroy me. Caldwell did not waste time with pleasantries. He slid a thick stack of medical and legal documents across the polished wood table. He began his assault by targeting the very foundation of my character. He brought up my deployment to hostile territories. He twisted my immaculate combat record, my survival, and my Navy Cross into a fabricated, weaponized narrative of severe psychological damage. "Sydney, your service record indicates prolonged exposure to high-stress combat zones," Caldwell stated smoothly, steepling his fingers together as if he were a medical expert. "Given your recent erratic behavior, including your unprovoked hostility toward your pregnant sister-in-law and your subsequent arrest by local law enforcement, we have filed a motion to question your mental competency to inherit and manage a $1.5 million estate." Before I could even respond to the sheer audacity of his claim, my mother leaned forward. Brenda pulled a lace handkerchief from her designer purse and forced tears into her eyes. It was a performance worthy of a daytime television drama. "We just want what is best for you, Sydney," Brenda cried, her voice trembling with fake sorrow. "An institution would be safer for your PTSD. You need intensive professional help, and this historic property is clearly too much of a burden for your fragile mental state. We are doing this because we love you. My father, William, nodded solemnly beside her. Sign the medical conservatorship, Sydney. Let us handle the estate. We can get you a nice room in a quiet facility where you cannot hurt yourself or anyone else. I sat perfectly still, observing them with clinical detachment. My own flesh and blood were actively trying to have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward. They wanted to strip away my fundamental human rights, brand me as mentally defective, and lock me in an institution. They were willing to destroy my entire life, all so they could hand my grandfather's legacy over to a money-laundering influencer. The betrayal was so profound it bordered on comedy. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my sanity or try to justify my military service to civilians who would never understand the sacrifices I had made. I looked Caldwell dead in the eyes and pushed the heavy legal documents back across the table with a single finger. I am of sound mind, Mr. Caldwell, I said, keeping my tone absolutely frigid. And I am entirely aware of what is happening in this room. I will not be signing a medical conservatorship, and I will not be surrendering my property to fund a criminal enterprise. If you wish to challenge my competency, I will happily undergo an evaluation by an independent military-approved psychiatrist. Until then, this deposition is over. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored blazer. Brenda dropped the crying act instantly, her face twisting into a scowl of pure, undisguised frustration. William slammed his hand on the mahogany table, shouting that I was making a terrible mistake and turning my back on my family. I ignored them completely. I picked up my briefcase and my heavy winter coat. As I gathered my belongings, I reached into my coat pocket and deliberately fumbled. A small, generic black USB flash drive slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the center of the conference table. I left it sitting right next to Caldwell's expensive legal pad. I pretended not to notice the drop. I turned my back on my parents and their sleazy lawyer walking out of the glass doors with my head held high. I knew exactly what human nature would dictate. Caldwell was an arrogant, overly confident attorney looking for a quick victory. He would see that forgotten USB drive and assume it contained my private financial records, my defense strategy, or my personal communications. He would not be able to resist the temptation to plug it into his firm's secure network to see what secrets he could steal to use against me in court. He had no idea the drive was a custom-built Trojan horse. It contained a highly aggressive zero-day payload designed to bypass commercial firewalls. The moment he plugged that drive into his computer, he would unknowingly grant me complete undetected remote access to his entire legal network. I drove away from the downtown corporate law firm feeling a profound sense of tactical satisfaction. Leaving that Trojan horse USB drive on the mahogany conference table was a calculated risk, but I knew Mr. Caldwell's arrogance would be his downfall. By the time I navigated through the thick Atlanta afternoon traffic, my custom malware would already be establishing a secure backdoor into his firm's confidential network. I was one step closer to dismantling the legal armor protecting Keisha and my parents. However, the satisfaction evaporated the moment I pulled my SUV onto the private street leading to my grandfather's historic estate. My military training had conditioned me to notice anomalies in my environment instantly. As I approached the perimeter of my property, the heavy wrought iron driveway gates were hanging slightly ajar. I had explicitly programmed the automated security system to lock those gates the moment my vehicle cleared the sensors this morning. I pulled over to the curb and cut the engine. I picked up my phone to check the live feeds from my exterior cameras. The screen loaded, but instead of displaying the crisp, high-definition footage of my front lawn and rear garden, the application displayed a uniform wall of static. Every single camera had been manually disabled. A cold, sharp focus washed over me. The digital war had just turned physical. I stepped out of my vehicle, ignoring the front gate entirely. I moved silently along the tall brick wall that bordered the side of the estate, slipping through a concealed maintenance entrance my grandfather and I used to use when I was a teenager. I approached the back of the house, keeping my profile low and stepping carefully to avoid crushing any dry leaves. The heavy oak back door was slightly off its hinges, the deadbolt completely shattered by blunt force. I entered my home silently. The destruction that greeted me in the main hallway was both visceral and deeply offensive. Whoever broke in was not a professional thief looking for electronics or jewelry. This was a frantic, emotionally driven teardown. The antique grandfather clock that had stood in the foyer for 40 years was knocked flat onto the hardwood floor. Its glass face shattered into hundreds of pieces. The velvet cushions of the vintage parlor chairs had been sliced open, white stuffing scattered across the oriental rugs like snow. Oil paintings had been ripped from the walls and tossed carelessly aside. They were desecrating my grandfather's legacy just to find a piece of paper. A loud crash echoed from the far end of the hallway, coming directly from my grandfather's old oak-paneled study. I heard the unmistakable sound of wood splintering, followed by heavy, frantic breathing. I did not call the police. I did not need the Atlanta Police Department to handle an intruder in my own home, especially not when the local precinct was already compromised by Judge Kensington's influence. I moved down the corridor with absolute silence, my footsteps making zero sound against the polished floorboards. I reached the open doorway of the study and looked inside. The room had been utterly ransacked. Every book from the floor-to-ceiling shelves had been violently swiped to the ground. The drawers of the massive mahogany desk were pulled out and dumped onto the carpet. Standing in the center of the wreckage, sweating profusely and breathing heavily, was my older brother. Malik was gripping a heavy solid steel crowbar in his right hand. He was wearing an expensive designer suit that was now covered in dust and wood splinters. He swung the crowbar wildly, smashing it into a locked wooden filing cabinet in the corner of the room. The cabinet dented, but the lock held. He cursed loudly, kicking the cabinet with his expensive leather shoe. "Where is it?" Malik screamed to the empty room, swinging the crowbar again. "Where did you hide the physical deed, you paranoid freak?" He was completely unhinged. Keisha's threat of divorce and the looming collapse of his fake real estate empire had pushed him over the edge. He actually believed that if he found the original paper deed, Keisha's corrupt lawyers could somehow forge a transfer of ownership and save him from ruin. "You are destroying a desk that survived 3 generations of this family," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the room like a blade. Malik spun around, startled by my sudden appearance. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. He looked at me standing calmly in the doorway, and instead of showing any remorse for destroying our grandfather's home, his face twisted into a mask of pure resentment. "Where is the deed?" Peyton Malik demanded, gripping the crowbar tightly with both hands. "Keisha needs the original hard copy. Her lawyers said the digital file is too heavily encrypted to seize. Hand it over right now. I am not playing games with you anymore." I stepped into the room, kicking a fallen book out of my way. "You broke into my house, you destroyed our family heirlooms, and you are standing in my study holding a weapon. You have exactly 3 seconds to drop that crowbar before I make you drop it." Malik laughed, a desperate, manic sound. "You think because you went to boot camp you can order me around? I am your older brother. I am the head of this family. You are going to give me that paper, or I am going to tear this entire house down to the foundation." He took a step toward me, raising the heavy steel crowbar above his shoulder in a threatening stance. He thought his size and his weapon would intimidate me. He forgot that the Marine Corps spent years training me in close-quarters combat. I had neutralized armed insurgents in active war zones. A panicked, out-of-shape real estate developer in a dusty suit was barely a warm-up. Malik swung the crowbar downward in a clumsy telegraphed arc. I did not block the weapon. I stepped inside his guard, slipping smoothly past the downward trajectory of the heavy steel bar. Before he could even register that he had missed his target, I drove the palm of my hand hard into the exposed nerve cluster of his bicep. The strike paralyzed his arm instantly. Malik gasped in shock, his fingers going entirely numb. The crowbar slipped from his useless grip and clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. I did not give him a fraction of a second to recover. I grabbed his wrist, twisted his arm sharply behind his back to lock his shoulder joint, and kicked the back of his knee. Malik's legs buckled completely. He crashed face first onto the floor with a heavy thud, knocking the wind out of his lungs. I dropped my weight smoothly, driving my knee directly between his shoulder blades and pinning him flat against the ground. I kept his arm locked tightly behind him, applying just enough upward pressure to ensure that any sudden movement would dislocate his shoulder. The entire altercation lasted less than 3 seconds. Malik was gasping for air, his face pressed uncomfortably into the dusty carpet. He struggled weakly against my grip, but he was completely immobilized. The golden boy of the family, the man who thought he could bully me into surrendering my inheritance, was pinned effortlessly to the floor of the room he had just destroyed. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. "Or do I need to apply more pressure?" Malik groaned, his cheek smeared with dirt from the carpet. He stopped struggling, realizing he was entirely outmatched. But as he lay there completely defeated physically, a dark, vindictive laugh began to bubble up from his chest. It was a pathetic sound, but it carried a terrifying confidence. "Go ahead and break my arm," Peyton, Malik wheezed, laughing bitterly into the floorboards. "It does not matter what you do to me, you are too late." I shifted my weight slightly, narrowing my eyes. "What are you talking about?" Malik turned his head just enough to look at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Keisha's lawyers did not just sit around waiting for this deed. They went straight to Judge Kensington this morning. "You think you are winning because you can fight. But the judge signed an emergency injunction an hour ago. Every single one of your domestic bank accounts, your credit cards, and your business funds are completely frozen. You have $0 to your name. We are going to starve you out until you beg us to take this house." I did not let Malik's maniacal laughter rattle me. I kept my knee firmly pressed between his shoulder blades and grabbed the back of his expensive, dust-covered jacket. I hauled him to his feet, twisting his arm just enough to keep him entirely compliant and moving forward. He groaned in pain, but did not try to fight back. I marched my older brother right down the hallway of the estate he had just vandalized. The shattered glass of the antique clock crunched under my boots. I opened the broken back door and shoved him out onto the stone patio. He stumbled, catching himself on a decorative planter, before turning back to glare at me. His suit was ruined, and his ego was completely shattered. "Get off my property," I ordered, my voice dangerously calm. "And tell your wife her legal parlor tricks are not going to work on me." I slammed the heavy oak door shut and engaged the secondary deadbolt. I did not waste time surveying the broken antiques or the slashed velvet chairs. Furniture could be replaced. Tactical leverage could not. I headed straight for my secure server room. I sat down at my primary workstation and logged into my domestic financial portals. Malik was not bluffing. My checking account, my savings, and my corporate business accounts all displayed the same bright red banner. "Account frozen by court order." Judge Thomas Kensington had bypassed standard legal procedure entirely. He had signed a draconian emergency injunction, effectively cutting off my access to every single dollar I held in the United States banking system. They were trying to financially suffocate me. Without access to funds, a normal person would not be able to hire a defense attorney, buy groceries, or pay the property taxes required to keep the estate out of foreclosure. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from Keisha illuminated the screen. I opened it to find a photograph of a dilapidated, roach-infested roadside motel on the absolute worst side of Atlanta. Underneath the photo was a mocking message. "I booked you a room for when the eviction hits on Friday. Kisses." She thought she had backed me into a corner. She thought cutting off my domestic banks would leave me destitute and desperate, crawling back to the family to beg for mercy. It was the exact playbook my parents used to control Malik. But I was not my brother. I tossed the phone aside and cracked my knuckles. I closed the domestic banking tabs and launched an encrypted dark web routing protocol. During my time as an elite freelance cybersecurity specialist, I frequently contracted with international defense agencies and top-tier corporate security firms overseas. I had accumulated a small fortune simply by exposing the weaknesses in billionaire corporate networks. Those clients often paid me in decentralized cryptocurrency. I never transferred that money into the American banking system. I kept it in a cold storage digital wallet floating on a secure randomized blockchain server that no county judge, corrupt or otherwise, could ever touch with a subpoena. I initiated the handshake protocol and entered a randomized 64-character decryption key. My hidden offshore wallet materialized on the screen. The balance was deep into the 7 figures, more than enough to sustain a prolonged legal war. I initiated a series of micro-transfers, routing the funds through 3 different international proxy servers in Switzerland, Germany, and Iceland before converting them into usable, untraceable digital debit accounts. I linked those accounts to anonymous prepaid cards I kept in a physical safe under my floorboards. In less than 10 minutes, I had entirely bypassed their financial blockade. Keisha and Judge Kensington thought they had severed my supply lines. In reality, they had not even scratched the surface of my resources. With my operational funding secured, I leaned back in my leather chair. The digital war was accelerating, and my enemies were getting careless. As if the universe wanted to reward their arrogance, a distinct high-pitched chime echoed from my secondary monitor. A bright green notification box popped up in the corner of the screen. Payload delivered. Connection established. I sat up straight, my eyes locking onto the data stream. The generic black USB drive I had deliberately dropped on the mahogany conference table at Mr. Caldwell's law firm had finally been activated. Caldwell or one of his nosy paralegals had succumbed to their curiosity. They had plugged the Trojan horse directly into the firm's highly secure intranet, probably hoping to find a diary, financial weaknesses, or evidence of the mental instability they were trying to pin on me. My custom malware had acted instantly. It did not destroy their files or lock their computers with ransomware. That would have alerted their IT department and triggered a lockdown. Instead, it behaved like a digital ghost. It slipped past their commercial firewalls, bypassed their client-attorney privilege encryption blocks, and established a silent two-way tunnel directly to my command center. I opened the interface and watched as the contents of Mr. Caldwell's private servers began cloning themselves onto my hard drives. I was looking at thousands of confidential legal briefs, corporate tax filings, and settlement agreements. But I did not care about the firm's other clients. I ran a targeted search query for two specific names, Keisha Montgomery and Judge Thomas Kensington. The search algorithm chewed through the data packets. Seconds later, a hidden password-protected folder materialized on my screen. Caldwell had named it Project Heritage. It was the exact file they were using to orchestrate the theft of my grandfather's estate. I cracked the folder's weak administrative password in under 30 seconds. The contents spilled across my monitors, and what I read made a slow, victorious smile spread across my face. It was not just legal strategy. It was a digital paper trail of absolute corruption. Caldwell had carelessly archived a series of direct, unredacted email chains between himself and Judge Kensington's private, non-judicial email address. The messages were incredibly explicit, showing a staggering level of arrogance. Keisha was promising the judge a massive off-the-books payout from her illegal money laundering syndicate the moment the title of my estate was successfully transferred to her name. Judge Kensington had replied from his personal tablet, confirming he would freeze my accounts and expedite the eviction process. Furthermore, the emails detailed their exact plan to fabricate the mental incompetency charges against me, complete with